us a little bit more about the foundation settlement part. What problem do you solve for your customers with this method or process?
So what we do is the vision that we obviously call it building stabilization, but there's a specific method that we use in addressing foundation settlement or subsidence issues. There's two issues that we do address. It's foundations that settled or that experience subsidence, and then it's surface beds or floors inside a house or a warehouse or wherever that sagged. And the reasons for that can be many aspects. It can be due to poor construction when they built the house or the structure or the warehouse. It can be because of changing moisture content in the soil, specifically in very active clay soils. It can be because there's a pipe that burst nearby and it washed out fines, and that caused the foundations to settle a bit more. Yeah, so there's a lot of aspects that we try to first figure out why it happened before we actually do our work. So there's a lot of testing and soil investigations that we do before. And if it's not an obvious thing, like for instance, if there was a burst pipe, it was the burst pipe that caused it. So it's quite obvious that that's the main cause of the issue. Then you obviously need to address that by fixing the pipe, and then address the foundations that experience subsidence with that. If it's not that obvious, we do a proper soil investigation before we tell a client that injection grouting or our process will be a viable option. And that tests include, we do a DCP test. It's called a dynamic cone penetration test. It's basically just a simple and easy method to test the bearing capacity of the soil underneath your foundations, and to see if there's any weak layers in the soil. So for instance, in sand, it's a fairly accurate test to do in sand, because it will give you vital information as to how the soil that actually needs to carry your structure looks like. And then we also do soil indicator tests, where we take soil samples from the specific site to a laboratory for testing, where they tell you exactly how much clay percentage is in the sample that you gave them. They can then it's a very technical thing, but you can get the PI levels of the soil that basically tells you how active that clay is or that soil is. So yeah, so there's a lot of technical stuff that we try to do beforehand if it's not clear, so that we can at the end of the day tell the client, listen, this is the test that we've done, this is what it indicates, and therefore our method would be a suitable method to use in order to actually address the problem.
So you guys are not only, you're not only working when the problem signs up, you're also doing preventative work. So for instance, I'm starting to build a factory from scratch. You can come and do the assessment for me and kind of ensure that my foundation is stable before I start building.
Yeah, so if it's a new development or something like that, it's normally the role of the engineer that's appointed by the client to ensure that those tests are done. Mostly it's done by geotechnical engineers that specializes in soil and soil testing. So if it's, for instance, a new development, they will do a full geotechnical investigation beforehand, and that will actually give you a lot of information as to how deep you need to excavate in order to build new foundations or columns or whatever you need to build. Yeah, but as a norm, we do offer that service specifically for our clients that has foundation settlement issues. Yeah, but for instance, there was a project last year at Palman Foods in Cape Town, where it was a old factory. It was built in the 70s. A part of it was built in the 70s. Another part was built in the 60s, and then they bought the factory over, and they wanted to build or extend their current factory into a much larger factory. So there was an existing structure that they kind of used what they could use. But for instance, the floors were a bit suspect, as they didn't really know what the strength of the floor is. And when they actually did some of the tests, they saw that there was mole runs pretty much
Yes.
everywhere
Wow.
beneath the floor. Yeah, so there was moles living underneath the floor, and obviously
Goodness me.
a mole run causes voids to form because they obviously
Yeah.
dig holes in the soil,
Yeah.
and they had to address that because they needed to put large racks and like mezzanine floors and stuff to actually store their products. And that's where we got involved. So we worked alongside with the engineer and the architect and the building company,
Yeah.
and they marked out specifically where those posts are going to sit on top of the floor, and we did our grouting piles at all those positions to ensure that it can actually carry the load.
That's quite an interesting project.
Yeah.
I suppose you guys can tell your customers obviously also where the different problem areas throughout your region is, because you work throughout the Western Cape and the Southern Cape as far as Eastern Cape. So you kind of know where the problem areas are.
Yeah, we definitely we got a lot of vital information, especially during the drought here in Cape Town in 2016, 17, 18, where we saw that a lot of areas where there's a very active clay, because the drought obviously took out all the moisture in the soil, and that caused to form voids. And as soon as it started raining again, that voids that formed, it at some areas it wasn't strong enough to actually carry the load of the building, and that caused major settlement issues as well. So we know in the Western Cape region where there's a lot of active parts, or parts where the clay is very active, and other parts that it's not very active. But yeah, it's obviously years and years and years of people investigating and obviously yeah, spent lifetimes and careers figuring this stuff out. So it's not too difficult to obviously get hold of that information. But we know there is certain parts around where we work where yeah, it's a different clay, and yeah, clay and sand obviously reacts a lot differently to water and stuff like that. So yeah, we definitely know about those stuff.